All right, we are back for another edition of Sunday Night Astro Live. I am your virtual navigator. Let me just do this real quick here. Switch the microphone. There we go. You should now be hearing my voice in a much more basso profundo sort of way. Anyway, I hope you are. How is everybody? We're getting a little bit of a late start, but I endeavor to be efficient. That is my new role, my new goal for all these streams is to be like a surgeon, be surgical with everything, so that we're getting to the meat of the matter as quickly as possible. But in the meantime, I will wait for a while because we'll let people sort of saunter in because we are getting a little bit of a late start. And I do want to welcome you all to the show. Where is everyone? Well, everyone will be here soon. We're just getting a little bit of a late push off here. As we wait for people to arrive, I want to say hi to Mary and Michael and DJ Pebblestone and Double M, Mr. Mark Matheny. What's going on, the man? Sweet Woodruff, checking in from the I don't know where you are. You can be in the Ingram, or you can be up in the DFW. In any case, good to see you here. Meow meow, Wendy Q, Peter Bione, down in Florida. Boy, it got a little soggy there, didn't it? So, returning to the scene of the crime. You know, when I was looking at the storm from last week, and I was looking at that shift from the moon in Cancer at the end to the moon in Leo, I was focusing on Florida, which I know got hit. Don't get me wrong, but I was really focusing more on Florida, and I had no idea, right, that thing was going to go deeper, and the brunt of it was really going to take place with North Carolina and other parts of the country that are in that zone. And I know we have a lot of people in the Asheville area, and apparently it's just a complete and utter fucking mess. So that's a big deal. And when I thought about it, it's like, those are red states, basically. I mean, Asheville is not red. Asheville is definitely on the purple blue side. But that whole area, those states are Trump voters. And I know that we have a long way to go in terms of the actual election, whatever that's going to look like. But nonetheless, the damage that was done in states that are again going to be generally more sympathetic on the Trump red side. And look, we've all been baptized by the dark waters of conspiracy, and we've all spent so much time looking at things like HARP and Katrina and Harvey and directed energy weapons and all the things that theoretically occur when it comes to manipulating the weather systems or the planet itself. So would it be out of the question because we know that there's a certain time of year where these things take place in that part of the world. So it's not like it's unexpected, right? But the way that these storms, and I'm no expert, but I've watched them for a number of years, and they tend to hang out and gather and gather and gather and gather force and hang out and gather force, and it feels like they're almost being moved at certain times in certain directions. Now, I don't know what the real culprit of this storm was, because it actually went from a Cat 4 to a Cat 1 when it hit landfall in Florida. So it did decrease in terms of its intensity, right? Because usually when it goes down, right, Cat 4 is high, Cat 1 is lower. And they were talking about how this was going to be very wet, but the winds apparently were really quite intense. And I have a client who lives in North Carolina, and she showed me trees that were being uprooted out of her property, and some of which had to do with the fact that the ground was so wet, but the other part was that the winds were so high. So, um, I'm not sure if we're completely. Well, I know we're not completely done with the toll and the damage that this major event has taken place, but man, the timing, right? The timing of everything, and just how close. So it didn't happen in like the Northeast, where they would be, where the so-called liberal or progressive intelligentsia would be paralyzed, but in the Southeast, where again the concentration of people that would be voting for somebody like Donald Trump seemed to be much more prevalent. Now, I don't know what's happening in terms of insurance and stuff like that in Florida. I've read some things that the coverage might be. I don't know. I don't know. But clearly, when they have an event like this, it makes a case for like 15-minute cities, doesn't it now? Right? Wouldn't it make a case for people to live in? And I'm not saying that's what I want. I'm just telling you that it would make a case for people to live in concentrated areas that would have more sort of resources available to them, whether those resources were in the moment or after the fact, versus living in these fringe outer lying areas where those resources will be much harder to get to. I think that really is part of the plan moving forward. That's the idea, right? The megalopolis and the 15-minute city. So if you're in one of these areas, and none of us are immune to any of these quote unquote phenomena. There's California, which we'll talk about tonight. There's the earthquake version. Clearly, you people in the Southwest, you've got your hurricane version. Here, mostly in the Midwest, we have tornadoes, big time tornadoes in places like Oklahoma, Missouri, sometimes Texas, in the Panhandle. From the south here in Texas, of course, we're also open to a lot of hurricanes. So nobody's really immune to any kind of natural disasters. And maybe people in the Rockies, lightning storms, fires, I don't know, right? But there's enough of these disaster-like situations where I think ultimately, at a certain point, they're just going to say no more, right? So whether it's your insurance company or whether it's a local government or whether it's a federal government, they're just going to say no more. We don't have the funds to rebuild these things. So what are you going to do? Right? What you'll do is you'll have to either live with the decrepit conditions of whatever's left over and whatever kind of power or resources at your disposal, or you will be forced off your quote unquote private property and then move into these megalopolises, the 15-minute cities that theoretically they have planned for us. So I don't think we're through by any stretch with any of these so-called disasters. Again, if the idea is to resettle people, right, and have this kind of new grid of how people are going to live. And again, is that going to work? Best laid plans of mice and men, but that's really the idea. So a lot of these conditions can be weaponized. What's really interesting is that when I was living in Fredericksburg, and we were just grinding on the city about the city's budget. One of the things that they did is they took this money from the federal government. And by the way, they're not alone. And it was this small cities initiative that was coming through the Biden administration. And part of what the city was convincing people in the area that it was really good for was for Wi-Fi and bandwidth and extending the Wi-Fi and the bandwidth into areas that were outside of the city. So a place like Harper, which is the next city over from Fredericksburg, not even really in the same county, different counties. But the idea, because a lot of people that work in Fredericksburg live in Harper, that they would extend whatever kind of infrastructure that they would get from this small city money that the federal government was giving away. And a lot of these cities made their case for bandwidth. I mean, this is how they pitched it to not just Fredericksburg, but all these other cities. Do you know who was in charge of that project? It was Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris was in charge of wiring up small town America. Hasn't happened. It has not happened. And I remember sitting in those city council meetings almost 3 years ago and really, kind of going at it with these people tooth and nail, that you don't have to take this money, right? If you really wanted to improve your bandwidth, all you had to do is slightly up your tourist tax for your Airbnbs, or even locally, you throw on, I don't know, 2 cents to every local purchase, because a shit ton of money like passes through Fredericksburg every year. In a short period of time, you'd have as much money as you needed to build your infrastructure. Now, that may not be the case for every city, because Fredericksburg is a different kind of city. It's a big tourist destination. But that's on Harris's hands. And we're going to look at her chart tonight, and there's a period coming here, excuse me, at the end of October, where there's a crisis for Kamala Harris. And if you've been following Candace Owens and this thing with her family tree and lineage and her father, I believe this is where, when you look at her chart, and we will look at her chart, that this is where the crisis will ultimately originate from, right? Maybe some of the, I wouldn't even call them mispenditures. Like, there's been no over, like, would you put Kamala Harris in charge of like, she's already supposedly the border czar, and now she's going to be the bandwidth czar? Like, so anyway, we're going to get into, so we have 3 things we're going to cover tonight. We're going to cover the eclipse. It's this week. It's on Wednesday. We're going to cover that. I was going to talk about California's chart last week, and people were concerned about earthquakes in California. So we're going to go over California's chart, and we're going to take a look at Kamala's chart as it relates to the crisis, the impending crisis in Kamala Harris's chart. So that is the map. That's the lay of the land for tonight's show. And I endeavor to be as efficient and as surgical as I possibly can be, so that everybody feels like I'm just getting right to it. Before I do, what I wanted to share with you out there is that we're going to have our event this week. Starts on Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So we're going to have the Harvest Moon event, Return to Venus, here in the Hill Country. And the schedule of events is as follows. On Friday, of course, we will do the Friday forecast from the event, right? And the guests will be the speakers. So it's always one of my favorite things to do. So that'll happen on Friday. That is going to be, of course, free of charge. Be able to watch it, take part. I'm currently working on linking up Saturday all day. So if you want to attend virtually, like you did last year with the eclipse, we're going to do that. And that will be an all-day pass. I should have it completely wired, hopefully by tomorrow. There's a lot of pieces that go into something like this, right? I have to put the page together. It's a lot harder than you might realize, and also link up the various pieces, the tech piece, and then, of course, there's going to be a financial piece, right? So it's like purchasing a virtual ticket to the Saturday event. So the Saturday event will consist of myself. I'm going to cover all the eclipses in 2025, right? And they're going to be going through Virgo, Pisces. This is an incredibly important series of eclipses for a number of reasons. But so I'm going to go over all those on Saturday. Then we have Mario Garza from Symbolic Studies, and he's going to do his presentation also on Saturday. And if you're familiar with Mario's work, it's beautiful. Like, he will take you on a journey, and we'll be exploring this idea of Venus, Libra, symmetry, beauty, relating, right? So Mario he's a fine artist, and he's a great esoteric symbologist. So you're going to want to watch that. And then we're going to do something quite interesting. And we're actually going to do a reading of a play that day. So our new friend, Jock Doubleday, has written a play about Tesla, and how there's a woman who visits Tesla in various parts of his life. And so our group, we're going to perform a reading of this play live. And guess what? You get to watch it, right? So Jock is a playwright, and he's been wanting to premiere this play, and he's been sending it around to various playhouses in the county, because Jock doesn't live that far from me. And he hasn't gotten the kind of response that would be, well, how would we say it? Warm, cordial, but it's like not like, hey, come on down. So we're going to do it, and what I love to do is have people do something that takes them a little bit outside of their comfort zone. And I think for most of us, reading a script from a play will do that, right? Because you have to get over your fear of being, seen in public and reading a line, but this will be really great because we're all going to do this together, and it's going to be like a premiere of Jock's play. You'll get to see that as well, right? So you'll get all day. There'll be a bit of a break, but we'll find a way to interact with you also during that Saturday. So I should have everything hooked up, linked up, and I'll have a way to get to it on Locals. During the week, we'll have at least 2 shows this week, Tuesday and Wednesday. I probably won't have a Thursday show because I'll just be concentrated and focused on getting ready for the event. But we'll make sure that the link is ready and available. Might even send out a bit of a newsletter if our email goddess has the time to do that. All right, it looks like we're pretty well wired up here. We got about 240 people. So why don't we just jump in? And Chantaria, thank you for being here as always and supporting the show and supporting my work in whichever way you do, whether it's just your eyeballs or becoming a Locals member or even by being a client. So I just want to thank each and every one of you for doing that and being a part of this community. Okay, well, why don't we get going? Look at me. I started 20 minutes ago, and I'm already like going to go right into the actual show. Holy shit. That's kind of amazing. See, this is the new me. This is the new Robert. I love bantering with all of you. It's one of my favorite things to do. Let's see. Let's do this. So this is what this eclipse is going to look like. Let me make it a little bit bigger so you guys can see it. All right. So this is a solar eclipse. It is not a full solar eclipse. Not like whatever we experienced in April of this past year. But you can see how it all lines up. right? There's the sun, there's the moon, there's Mercury. Oh, look at that. Black moon Lilith is also in on the mix here. Look at that. It's right there. Boom. Right. So what do I see when I first of all, let's just take the moon and the sun. And look, I'm talking about this from an astrological, mythopoetic energy read. You can have whatever story you want around the eclipse, right? So this is how I am interacting with the material. In Libra, what do we deal with? We deal with cordiality. We deal with balance. And Libra is not a sign that is balanced. Libra is a sign that is looking for balance. And it may find a little balance here, and then slowly the scales get a little tweaked, and then there's an adjustment, right? Libra is always in a state of adjustment. That's the nature of Libra. And we know that Libra is about mediation and synergy and cordiality, politeness, the social codes. Now, when we have the sun, which is the definition of the zodiacal sign that it's in, when it is eclipsed, it means that the potentiality of the sun during that brief period of time is occulted. So it is not in its in its most powerful placement, right? The idea here is that whatever it is that it stands for, it is the sign on the other side of the sun that will take, in some ways, greater precedent. So what's the sign on the other side of Libra? It's Aries. Right. So you can see here that these are the transits for that day, right? It's basically the same. I mean, you just take these out. It's wasted space. So if we know that this idea of synergy and cooperation, hey, here's a word that people don't use much anymore: diplomacy. Right? Those are kind of not on the table. They're not on the table. What is on the table? True Node in Aries. Has anybody noticed that there's been an uptick in violence, war? I mean, let's go through the checklist. Let's talk about the Middle East. Let's talk about Israel. All right, if you're paying attention, Israel has now extended its war zone. Remember how it was, well, we're just going to go after Hamas, and we're just going to, root out the bad guys that caused October 7th, which, by the way, we're coming up on a year. We're just going to go after them because they're a threat to our safety. Well, a year later, how's that going? Yeah, it's kind of gotten a lot bigger, hasn't it? Because now they've extended their what I would call aerial sorties into other areas, specifically Lebanon, Iran, Yemen, and guess what? Syria. So Israel is on a warpath. On a warpath. And when we have the sun occulted here in Libra, again, what is Libra supposed to do? Right? Libra is supposed to make peace, extend an olive branch. That's not happening, right? That's not happening. What did we see last week? In Pennsylvania, you had Josh Shapiro, who's the governor of Pennsylvania, and all these other people basically signing bombs with Zelensky of Ukraine, and they're targeted for Russia. So we're seeing this war machine. It's metastasizing before our very eyes. And the government of the United States is assisting these countries. So Israel is getting high-level logistics from the. If you want to know what's happening, please go to winterwatch.net. Our good friend Russ Winter spends a lot of time breaking this down. That is it. What's going on in Israel has become Russ's sort of central column of his editorial output. And so I go there, I read his website, and it's very clear that Israel's using logistical information to go in and target areas in places like Lebanon. Now, this is all happening during this eclipse. I do believe it also, this eclipse definitely affects Israel. Let me see if I can get their chart up here. Hold on. Here we go. Yep. So I'm just going to bring this up. We're not going to look at it just yet. But this eclipse does affect Israel. Israel's Neptune is at 10 degrees Libra. So Israel's had essentially 2 eclipses happen in their chart. They had the Rosh Hashanah eclipse. And then what is this coming weekend? Is it Yom Kippur? Or, I know it's an important like day, right? So it's not right on that day, but it's this weekend where all this starts to happen. Anyway, I'll bring this up in a second, just so you guys can have a look. But getting back to the chart that we're looking at, let's go in here. Getting back to the chart that we're looking at, let's see. Where is this? No, that's not it. Hold on. Yeah, there we go. No, that's Israel's chart. Come on now. Where are we? That's right here. There it is, right there. Let me zoom in a little bit more. Yeah. Yeah, right there. Right there. So again, think of the thing with both Mercury and the moon in Libra is that that's a very intuitive kind of aspect, right? It's like Mercury and the moon merge together. So the ability to think, articulate, and also intuit and feel are merged into one field, right? One sort of single point of expression. And it almost feels like this eclipse is jamming that frequency in general. So I would say by and large, and we're kind of in this wave now. And I don't know if people are experiencing this, but I've been feeling really edgy. Like today, I was pretty edgy today. And I remember just being inside of Costco, and it was like super packed. And I've never seen as many people there
during just a regular Sunday. It was like, and maybe this is kind of a precursor of what people are feeling. Because the other side of this too is that we started talking about this last week where, excuse me, these ports are scheduled to shut down on the 2nd. Now, I don't know if people are paying attention to that. And that's why Costco was, I've never seen so many people in Costco outside of a holiday, I swear to God. Or maybe they're intuitively feeling what's on the horizon, right? And I just remember today feeling edgy and kind of uptight in some ways about. It felt like there were too many rats in the cage. That's what it felt, and most people were, I would say, polite, right? But I remember there was this one time today where there were so many. I wanted to. I know it sounds really dumb, but I wanted to take a left onto this aisle where they had like dips and stuff because we're gonna have a party barbecue after the event, and wanted to get a dip. And so I could feel somebody behind me, but I couldn't really let them go by because I'm waiting for this like stream of carton flesh to just finish passing because I don't want to just like jump in front of them. Hey, got a little Libra in the chart, right? And so I hear this voice in the back of my head or from behind me wanting to get by me. Where am I supposed to go? Am I supposed to throw myself up against the meat section, right, or where the shrimp cocktail trays are, and sort of get back there and let her go by? Well, guess who's in front of me, right? The lovely and talented one. So she still has somebody else in front of me. So you got to get around her. I mean, it was kind of a weird scene. And so I just waited. Like I heard her, and I just waited. And finally, after the last cart went by, I took the left. It's a fucking Costco. It's not an intersection, you know, at a stoplight, but it felt like it. So again, I'm wondering, like, you know, what's the buzz? It's not even really a buzz. It was more of more of an edge. It definitely felt like an edge. So we're in the zone, right? And it feels to me like people are like we're being tested. And when I say tested, I don't mean tested in the sense that well, maybe oh, here is a grand cosmic test that you must pass in order to get to the next level so you can experience all these tremendous powers and insights into your eternal being, right? But more tested, like, man, can I just hold it together? Can I just hold it together long enough to get through this intense cycle? Because we're coming to an end of these Aries Libra eclipses. You know, if we went back to the event last year, you know, we had two eclipses. You know, we had the eclipse last October, which went right through Kerrville, right? This was the one that came up from Mexico. So that happened a year ago, right? Then we had the April eclipse, which again came, actually, the October eclipse came down. So it came down from like the Pacific Northwest and came down, and then the April eclipse came up. So it's the Aleph. You guys know it. You've seen it. I don't have to go there. It's the Aleph. But this eclipse is in some ways the companion eclipse of last October, right? And that one was at around 24 Libra. So this is right at 10, 11, 12 Libra. So we're in the second decan, which puts it in the Aquarian decan, which is, again, kind of more group related. But here we're ditching all of that. This is all about the individual. And it feels to me like there's an unwanted emphasis on the individual. And what do I mean by an unwanted emphasis? Well, an unwanted emphasis is that normally we have these levels of cooperation, or we have these levels of being able to find a semblance of being able to relate with one another. That's the nature of Libra. But it kind of goes out the door, right? And it's not just like this magic switch that happens. Like, it's like, oh, all of a sudden we have an eclipse and this is what's going to occur. No, this has been ongoing for a while. Like these series of eclipses, and particularly in this country, because those eclipses took place now look, all you people in other parts of the world, you'll have your turn for your eclipses. I promise you will have your eclipses. But these last eclipses have, not this one, but in April and October, they're big. They're the trifecta of the Great American Eclipse Cycle. So one of the things that has happened I would say as a result, like if you look at this last eclipse in April, let me see if I can find it, just so you can see it and get a visual. All right. So this is I'm just going to go to this tab here. So we can see, right, where this was coming from. Let's just go to the old NASA site, see if we can, like right here. That's not a good one. Let's go back. But right here. Okay, so this was the path of the eclipse, right here, right there. These are all names. Will you be in Shadowland, Texas on the eclipse? Corona, Missouri. So these are all lunar-related names of the eclipse that were in the path of the eclipse. Half Moon, Moon Beach, Telescope, Luna Pier, Sun Valley, Corona, Sun Terrace, Moon, Shadowland, Luna. So it's kind of cute, right? I didn't know there's so many Sun Valleys. But look at the path of the eclipse. It's literally coming from the south. Okay. This eclipse, even though we can start sort of deeper into Mexico, this eclipse is the quote unquote immigrant path. And of course, we've been having waves of immigrants for quite a while in this country. Well, particularly since the Biden administration came in. But the eclipse that we're talking about seems to have facilitated, or at the very least accelerated, the idea that there are more people coming from the south, right? So if we go back 6 months ago, were we talking about Haitians in Springfield, Ohio? The answer to that would be no. We weren't talking about Haitians in Springfield, Ohio. Were we talking about Venezuelan gangs taking over apartment complexes in Aurora, Colorado? No, we weren't. We weren't talking about it in April, but we are now, right? We're having those conversations now. And this wave has been ongoing. It's been happening for a while. But the eclipse in April, post-eclipse in April, seems to have accelerated the process. And not just accelerated the process, right? It would be one thing if the process was accelerated and the people that showed up said, hey, how's it going, neighbor? Nice to meet you. You know, my name is Jean-Pierre, or you know, whatever a Haitian name would be, right? Hey, nice to meet you. First of all, they don't speak English. Has that stopped immigrants in the past? No, not really, right? But they're not going to come up and say that to you. And the other thing is the numbers, the massive numbers. So 20,000 Haitians all coming to Springfield, Ohio, which, by the way, has got to be somewhere on the path of this fucking eclipse, right? There's Akron, there's Dayton. I guarantee you Springfield is somewhere in this zone, okay? But the representation of how this new culture is showing up, I gotta say, is a lot more Aries than Libra. And if you would disagree with me, I would like for you to make your argument. Make your best case argument. Because if it was Libran, then everybody would be copacetic and it would be balanced. You know, people sit down and say, well, you know, 20,000 is a lot. Maybe we should start off with 200. And let's see how that works. That would be a balanced approach. No, that's not how it's going. And at this point, I'm not even sure. It's like, are they even coming from the South anymore? No, they're probably being flown in at this point. And like, hey, here's the headline. They've been being flown in for years. Years. I remember being on a show with Regina Meredith, and we actually talked about this. And there were these planes that were coming in, and there were these buses that would like literally just roll right onto the tarmac. I saw the video. And there were these waves of buses, and they'd line right up on the tarmac. And then they would take people and then ship them straight out. Right? So yes, we've seen, you know, the Amazon River of human flesh come up from the southern part of Texas, but that's not the only path, right? There are other ways to get here, and they have been exploiting those ways. So you can see this, right? You can see what's happened, and again, it's not a very Libran kind of. Libran would be balanced. Oh well, yeah, sure. Let's, you know, we're open to the plight of the world. Yes, I know. We helped fuck those places up, so we bear some responsibility. But let's be rational about this. Let's be balanced. No, it's not happening in that way. So what you're getting now, or what we're getting, is a very intense, probably thought out, but not in the way that you think it would be thought out. A very intense, thought out dose of people that unfortunately are going to be more Aries-like than Libra-like. Do you understand what I'm saying? They're going to be much more Aries-like. And we're already seeing that. Like if we go back, like what is Aries, right? Aries is the epitome of the hunter-gatherer. right? That's what Aries is. It's the epitome of the hunter-gatherer. Because if you look at sort of the developmental stages of the first three houses, Aries is all about hunting and gathering. That's all Aries does. Give me a spear, give me a knife, give me whatever. Let me go out and let me catch it. It's immediate. When you get into Taurus, you get into, guess what? You get into agrarian. You get into an agrarian society, right? You're using the land, which is very Taurian, and you're cultivating the land and you're growing large chunks of agriculture for people to consume. Then you go into the third house. And what is the third house? It's Gemini. And what do we know about Gemini? It's urban. Gemini is urban. Gemini is the exchange of information. Gemini is transportation. Gemini is speed, right? So the first three houses represent essentially where we are. Hunter-gatherer, agricultural, modern, urban. Those three, right? So we're in, say, a third house state or third house space. Like we've we're in that zone. Telecommunications, the internet, right? Cars, Tesla, hybrid vehicles, petroleum, you name it. Third house. This is what we've cultivated. And now they're bringing people, not just in this country, by the way, but I am talking about this country. Now they're bringing people that are still, in many ways, in that first house world. You understand what I'm saying? Right? They're dropping first house Aries, essentially. Now, and I'm sure there are some brilliant Haitians. I'm sure there are. Isn't that guy from the Fugees? I can't remember his name. I'm sure there's some brilliant Haitians. I'm not here to have a broad brush stroke and not say there aren't Haitians that are civilized, right? But it's beyond that. We're also talking about other people who are much more persistent about getting what they need through violence and force, which again tends to be much more first house, much more predatory. So this is what we're dealing with here, right? This is what we're dealing with. And part of this eclipse is about that. Part of this eclipse is what happens when the veneer civility is wiped away. What happens if this port strike does happen on the 2nd of October? What kind of civility? How long will we go if things stop showing up? How long can we go and maintain the semblance of a reasonable, not even high trust, mid-trust society, if all of a sudden the flow of goods and the things that we need can't get into the country? Well, we might be about to find out. The other thing that we were looking at the other day, and this was on the Astro Weather, has to do with the connection between the word Libra and labor. They're very close in a lot of ways, right? Very, very close. So if you pay attention and you go out to a restaurant, there's probably a better than average chance that anytime during the month of September and October, you're going to hear somebody sing a birthday song. Because the majority of people are born in September or October. So what does that mean? It means that there is a tendency for people, women, to go into labor during these 2 months more than any other month, right? So Labor Day means a couple of different things. One, it means that this is the day where it's it's actually the precursor to the autumnal equinox, but the days are getting shorter, so you have to put your labor in. Like, this goes back to the agricultural society, where everybody gets in on the farm and works really, really hard for the next 3 weeks. And then as the sun begins to go down earlier and earlier, there's much less time that you have to spend on the outdoors. Hopefully you've managed to harvest everything. Then you do your canning, your drying, your smoking, all the things that you need to get you through the rest of the year. Right? That's part of, but it's also indicative of the time that where the majority of the births are born, or it's this like time where there's labor. So Libra is connected to this idea of contracts, because Libra is contractual. And so we have Libra and labor and contract and agreement. They're all in the same family, right? And then when we have an eclipse, and by the way, what day is October 2nd? Well, isn't that the day that the ports are supposed to strike? Mm-hmm. That's right. So how long, again, this is an open-ended question, how long will it take for things to unravel if this does take place? I don't think very long. I think we could get by maybe for 2 weeks. 2 weeks. And then what happens is that there's this exponential backlog. So the longer that these goods can't get into the country, then it's not just like, okay, well, if we end the strike in a week, we'll catch up on a backlog of 1 week's worth of goods that need to be delivered. It's not quite like that. And the reason it's not like that is because in order for those goods to actually get facilitated and leave the port, it will take at least 3 to 4 weeks because of the buildup in the back. It's not like 1 for 1. Oh, we have a week's worth of backup. It's just a week. No, it's not. It doesn't work that way. If you're not familiar with why the strike might occur, is that there are 3 entities involved. The 2 entities that are at odds with each other are the ports, and the ports are their own entity. And then you have the port or the dock workers, and the dock workers belong to a union. And the ports have been engaged in automation, right? Just like every other business, they're looking at the future and they're saying, you know what? Not only can we ultimately do this more efficiently because of automation, but so one of the things you hear from truckers is that when they go to the ports, that the port workers are not really running around like they have their pants on fire. Like, this is what the truckers say. Now, there may be people who are watching this and work in a port, and you may say, well, that's not really true. That's only some of the workers. I don't know. I don't work in a port. I'm just telling you what this truck driver said. And the truck drivers have had immense frustration with these people that work at the port who seem to work on their time and not the truckers' time. So the truckers are having to wait and wait and wait, and they're behind on their loads. So what happens to them is that, they're under greater pressure to get what's coming off the truck to where it needs to go. And like they already have very tough jobs. So it's like, okay, well, can I speed? Where can I speed? You know, there are all these things that go through their brains. And if they can't get their goods, it makes them much more agitated, much more frustrated. So it's a bad story for everybody involved. So the truckers are really on the port side, and they're thinking, okay, well, if you just eliminate these assholes and get some automation, we can get our goods and be gone, and we'll be fine. Well, the truckers don't understand that they're next on the chopping block because the automation will also include them at a certain point. Not now, but in the future, if everything goes according to plan, all of that will be minimally manned by as few humans as possible. So this is really what the strike is about. And the port or dock workers union, they want I believe, a 50% increase in their salary, which they will not get. Again, this is according to a trucker that we played last week on the show and seemed quite legit, right? So again, like this is all part of this eclipse action. Libra, labor, contract, and then down here you have Aries on the other side of all this. You know, the other thing that really jumps out at me is Pluto. And Pluto, for this eclipse, 3:42 p.m., is right on the frickin' ascendant. And we have become so familiar with this degree of Capricorn. If you're new to the show, welcome, first of all. I like to use the Sabian symbols. And the Sabian symbols were created by Mark Edmund Jones and Elsie Wheeler in Balboa Park, California, many, many, many years ago. And this degree of Capricorn has played a huge, huge role in sort of where we are, right? So if we look at the chart, let me go back here. Where is it? Hold on. Right here. Okay, so if we look at the charts, 2940, right? 2940, 2956. What are we reading that for? We're reading it for 30, right? 30, which is actually nearly zero. All right, so let me show you 30 Capricorn. It's right there. Hold on, let me go back. Give me a second. It's right here. Phase 209, hold on, it's phase 30. A secret meeting of men responsible for executive decisions in world affairs. This is where we are now. Right? This is exactly where Pluto 29 is, but it's past 2930, so we read it for 30. The power to assume responsibility for crucial choices arrived at after mature discussions with those who share this power. Now, listen, Dane Rudhyar was far more trusting than I would be. Plus, Dane Rudhyar was a theosophist who believed in something called the Great White Brotherhood or the White Lodge, which is this body of supernatural beings, ascended masters that work behind the scenes to move the spiritual evolution of humanity forward. He was a complete believer in this concept. So when I read this, you have to keep that in mind. Okay? So here we go. We are all aware now of the work of secret committees in the White House and at all levels of the government. The student of esoteric philosophy believes in the existence of what has been called an inner government, which has the power to direct or guide the evolution of our planet and of mankind. Some speak of occult hierarchy or of the White Lodge. Here again, what is at stake is a seeing through the facts of telluric processes in human history, assuming that these facts are at least in part the outcome of the decisions of a supreme council of quasi-divine beings. What is he really talking about here when he says that? Is he saying that a council of quasi-divine beings exists somewhere outside of this body or outside of the body? Or is he referring to a group of people who are embodied and they are quasi-divine as a result of that embodiment? I'm not sure, to be honest with you, but either way, that's what he's inferring. Like, he's inferring that there's a group of people that are benevolent, that are behind the scenes, that are pushing things forward. And it's their decisions that they make that trickle down into the hierarchy of humanity's affairs. That's the Rudyard world. Okay. Obviously, the symbol can also refer to what occurs at the more ordinary level of business and politics. At any level, it refers to the highest form of social interaction. Why? Because it's the hot. Because the next degree is Aquarius. And when you move into Aquarius, you move into a different social milieu. It is not governed from the top down. So when Rudyard talks about this, he's referring to this specific degree as the apex of humanity, or a group of people who sit at the perch, the eagle's nest of humanity, to make those decisions. Whether or not they're quasi-divine is completely irrelevant. I mean, maybe it's relevant to him, and maybe it's relevant for some of you who, bless your heart, believe that there is a group of people or a group of entities or a group of beings who are in some ways in charge behind the scenes that we don't understand. Most of us are much more familiar with the second part, right? Obviously, the symbol can also refer to what occurs at the more ordinary level of business and politics. At any level, it refers to the highest form of social interaction. So I would suppose that in our sort of mortal world of the meat suits, right, that this would refer to people who are connected to the highest levers of power in the ordinary 3D political socioeconomic world. This last symbol belongs to scene 20 and related to the zodiacal sign Capricorn. We see in it the culmination of social responsibility and a reference to executive power. Okay. So what does that all mean? Some of you have probably been paying attention to what was coming out of the White House last week. And it sure felt like they were talking about some form, like they were making resolutions around continuity of government. That's what it felt like. Like, oh, like what's going on here? You know, this is something we're kind of batting around on Twitter. Like, was it Mike Johnson? So my question here is, we'll go back to the chart. My question here is not so much the eclipse. The eclipse, to me, the eclipse is, again, this occultation around Libra and agreement and labor and contract. And this idea that we interact with each other in a civilized fashion. Libra balances the chart. Like if you want to play this game, right, the upper part of the chart represents the manifestation of civilization in some ways, right? And then the lower part of the chart represents our foundational structures and the world in which we've emerged from. And Libra plays the leveler in the role that balances both of these worlds, right? This would be our inner life and our family life and our outer life and the evolution of a cosmological, sociological paradigm and order. Libra balances those two things. When the sun and the moon and Mercury in this regard are occulted, then the ability to balance and adjust is lessened. And the sign on the other side, Aries, becomes much more prominent, right? It's almost like the season of power in some ways with Aries. And with Pluto on the ascendant here, to me, this is the eclipse time. And Pluto is really the planet, and Pluto is the player. Like this sets the stage. But Pluto is the player. And so what's going to happen as we move into Thursday, Friday, like what are going to be the executive? There's already been an executive order, by the way. I think Biden did something about guns, like in the last, 48 hours or something like that. By the way, executive orders apparently only really are, they're only really connected and enforceable in Washington, D.C., which I've been kind of looking into, but that's a different story. But this is going to be very interesting to watch, this upcoming eclipse. And this Pluto, particularly, on the ascendant at this time, I think is a big deal. I think it's a big deal, and I think that it's a trigger for what happens here. Now, if there's no strike at the ports, well, we're having a different conversation, a bit of a different conversation. But if there is the strike at the ports on the 2nd, then remember, this is this group of men who make decisions, who make executive decisions for others. I've talked about this before, but when Trump was elected in 2016, Mars was in Aquarius at, what was it, 29 degrees. No, Mars in Capricorn at 29 degrees on the night of that election. And I was fascinated by that Mars. I'm like, what the fuck? What is going to happen? Something big is going to happen the next day. Because it goes to 0 Aquarius, so it's revolutionary. And I'm convinced that there was a decision that was made on the night of Trump's election that they did not have enough votes to be able to push the election in Hillary Clinton's direction. Like they just didn't have enough back. I think they underestimated Trump. That's what happened. They underestimated Trump. He had way more support than the poll. There was only one poll that remotely hinted at Trump winning, and it was the LA Times. And they were able to somehow get in touch with a much older voting base. And I also think that they got some real-time information where people were coming out of the polls versus prior to the polls. All the other polls, though, were off. So if they were simply going on the massive amounts of poll data, they would have said, okay, let's say we have to cover up for a 3% margin. Now, remember, Hillary Clinton won the popular election, but Trump won the electoral election. He won the states that mattered. At the end of the day, he got electoral votes. So I just don't think they had enough votes in the right places. It wasn't that they didn't have, they had the votes, but they didn't have them in the right places. And like, for instance, Michigan or Pennsylvania, and if I'm not mistaken, Wisconsin, all those Trump states went to Trump where they had never gone to before. And I just don't think they had okay, we've got these states, we've covered these states, and it didn't happen. So I don't think they had the requisite number of ballots to flood those areas. And some of those states, particularly Pennsylvania, I think has a fair amount of electoral votes attached to it. So, of course, we know that in 2020, there was a very different outcome to the election. But at some point during that night, the 29th degree of Capricorn kicks in and basically says, Hillary, we don't have the votes. We don't have the votes in the right places. He's got to be the winner. And that's what happened. Somewhere in the middle of the night, right around 1:32 in the morning, while a lot of you were asleep back in 2016, I wasn't. They made the call. That's your 29-degree Capricorn. Now, the next day, as Mars went into Aquarius, well, that was the first day of the fucking revolution. Like, it was on like Donkey Kong. They were ready to go. They weren't going to waste any time. They already had Russia collusion and that whole, fake ass story ready to cook. It was ready to cook just in case something like that happened. And that's exactly where they went. Right. So I'm just giving you an example of what that 29th degree looks like. And it's going to be at 29 degrees during the election. Right. This is the last election with Pluto in Capricorn, period. Right. And we've had decades of elections here, let me put it this way. We've had decades of elections since Pluto was at the 27th degree of Capricorn, which is where it is in the United States chart. Right. We've had decades. We've had, a couple of centuries. And now that's coming, that's like through the Pluto return and the last degrees of Pluto, that is coming to an end. It's coming to an end. And will there be another body of decision makers that will jump in during the election? And if so, when? This is much more about the eclipse than it is about the election. But in some ways, they're connected. And they're connected all the way back to Mars when it was at 29 Capricorn. It's so weird that we keep coming back to this 29th degree. But it's not. Right? Because we're getting ready to move into this new time of Aquarius. So the old order and the old ways of doing business are, they're kind of, the clock, their time is running out. And there will be good things about that. And there will be some very difficult things about that. We'll get into that in a later show. But so this is just for this eclipse. And let's round this off a bit. What happens when an eclipse occurs, the sun and what it stands for is occulted, which means that the opposite sign is going to be, it's not an ascendancy, but it will be in greater power before, during, and after the eclipse. And I believe this is the last eclipse in this Aries Libra cycle, right? And after this, it's Pisces Virgo, which is a very, very different sequence of eclipses. Very, very different. So anyway, I'll get into those this weekend when I do a deeper dive on those eclipses. All right, that's what we're dealing with this week. And again, I think the key factor in all of this is labor and agreements. And if there is a labor stoppage, if there is something going on with these ports, which is what this trucker was talking about, and it's bang on because October 2nd is when this thing is supposed to happen. How long does it take before things go literally off the chart? That's an open-ended rhetorical question. All right. Moving on. Do you like how I'm keeping a rather efficient pace tonight? You talked, I listened. Okay. Let's talk about here. All right. I want to bring Israel's chart up here. Because I pulled it up. So remember, this is where the eclipse is happening, right here at 10. And we had the lunar eclipse, if I'm not mistaken. What was the eclipse on the? No, that was another solar eclipse, wasn't it? Let me go back. Hold on. Let me do this. Before I speak, I must know of which I speak, because I don't want to fuck up. Okay. So the September 17th eclipse was a lunar eclipse, partial lunar eclipse. That's what I thought. And this one is a annular solar, so it's like the ring of fire, right? And by the way, I wanted to show you what this eclipse actually looks like. Let me see if I can line it up here. Here it is. So this is what the upcoming eclipse will look like in terms of its path. Okay. So this is the path of the eclipse right here. And what I think is interesting is it starts out here kind of in the belly of the ring of fire, right? And the ring of fire is in this zone right here. And there are earthquakes all over the world, but this is where the majority of these earthquakes occur. So this is the path of the eclipse, and it's really coming down here at the tip of South America and also Antarctica, right? So here we go. Let's watch the path of it. So it's starting right here, right? This is where it's starting to come into play. Moving. And then we are into the highest point, which is right down here. right? And this is where it dissipates and it moves on. So does this mean that there could be some interesting action in the Ring of Fire? I think so. And remember, this part of South America tends to be very earthquake centric. So we are having this eclipse happen. Doesn't this feel like this was bigger at some point too? Like Chile's got kind of ripped off. And Chile's got this little tiny strip of land. I've always wanted to go to Chile, by the way. It's a little tiny strip of land, right? Let's see, where's Whitney Webb? Probably right about. Hi, Whitney. Hi, Whitney Webb. Like, come on, Argentina, give them a little bit more. They're getting squeezed out by the Pacific Ocean here. Yeah, no, I think it's interesting that this eclipse is happening in this area, which is definitely connected to. Usually, what I've seen is when something happens along the Ring of Fire. Let's say there's an earthquake here. Then usually what happens is that it starts to go this way. And Japan is one of these very interesting places in that if it does not culminate in Japan, because they seem to get, like if you go onto USGS, their earthquakes tend to be pretty big. But if it doesn't stop there, it tends to amplify, and there's a whole like fault line that goes over here and carries everything to Alaska and then comes back down here again. So it feels kind of clockwise with the Ring of Fire. Now it could just be, clockwise centric, but so I would say with this eclipse, pay attention to Chile, Peru, this area, right? Because there are incidents where eclipses and earthquakes are connected. So keep an eye on this area in terms of Earth movement, right? Because if that happens, then it could also trigger this other sort of circle of the Ring of Fire. Okay? All right, let's go back to Israel's chart. I just wanted to play that for you. So here's Israel's chart, and that lunar eclipse happened here in the 10th house, 12th house, rather, I'm sorry, where Israel has Neptune at 10 degrees. So when the eclipse occurs on Wednesday, the sun, the moon, Mercury will all be here, right? All in the 12th house. Now, if you pay attention to Mars, right, Mars is going to go into Leo, and Israel has almost half its chart in the 10th house. Moon, Pluto, Saturn, Mars, and lots of affliction here, especially Saturn, Pluto, the moon. It's just, man, this moon Pluto conjunction is so fucking intense, right? It's just really, really, really. There's no relenting with this moon Pluto conjunction, and I wonder what kind of backlash at some point is going to occur. If there's, I don't know if there's any backlash. My thesis all along is that Iran is a client state of the United States and the CIA, and quite possibly the Mossad, as they ran the Shah of Iran out, and they replaced the Shah with the Ayatollah, who was kind of a nobody, right? I mean, it was really an intel operation, and at that point, right, like, it became a client state of the U.S. And as a result, by default, a client state also of Israel, because of the relation between the United States and Israel. So you also have to wonder about the leadership of Iran. And who are these people? right? Are they really representative of the people? Or are they just puppets of another proxy state? I mean, if you really think about it. And do we really know that they're dead? We don't really know that. We don't know that this, these generals and these imams, that they've just been picked off one by one by one by one by. I mean, I'm sure in some cases that's true, but we don't really know. We're just going on what's being told and given to us, right? So I feel like Neptune in the 12th house. It's a nice position for Neptune, but it's also squaring Venus in this chart, which means that agreements reached for this country aren't worth a shit. I'm sorry, they're not worth a shit. You're just not going to have a really rock solid agreement with a Venus Neptune square. Ain't going to happen. Not going to happen. So maybe this eclipse might bring some light to that, although I seriously doubt it. Something's going to happen here, though. Something's going to happen with this Mars. Like every 2 years, Israel has a Mars transit. So it's not like this hasn't happened before. But it didn't happen last year, right? It takes 2 years for a Mars return. Didn't happen last year. Last year, Mars, October 7th, it wasn't around. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. The last time Mars was here was in 2022. And remember, I think in about 6 degrees or 7 degrees, it retrogrades. And it goes back over into Cancer. I don't think this is good for Israel. The retrograde is not good. Because Mars has been moving forward. And this is what they've been doing militarily, moving forward, expanding the war, expanding the line of casualties. And then this retrograde happens. And I'd like to think that it would represent some kind of a retreat or some kind of a pulling back due to something impeding the progress, the forward march of Mars. I'd like to think that. So we'll have to keep an eye on it. But it stops, right? It stops right about there. And it goes retrograde and back into the 9th house. And I don't think it looks well upon the rest of the world. But, as long as these two countries have, a snug handshake deal, does it really matter? I don't know. But I would say that the eclipse, if anything, would bring some light to the fact that these agreements are worthless. It's worthless. It's not a country you want to have an agreement with. None. There's nothing with Venus there that even says, hey, remotely, yeah, you can trust us. No, it doesn't work that way. Not at all. And then Uranus, of course, is still here, right? Still here, still floating around their sun, retrograding. It'll come back again. And I think when Uranus gets to those final degrees next year in Taurus, when it gets into that hard square with Mars, there's kind of a cataclysmic endpoint here. And the cataclysmic endpoint is either Israel destroys and evaporates all of its enemies and is the one ring to rule them all, or the reverse happens and that all of a sudden the energy is coming back in ways that they didn't expect. To me, it's really the hot spot. Ukraine is big because it connects Europe and NATO and Russia, which is much bigger kind of war power in some ways. But this area is really the big area right here. And it doesn't really seem to matter what happens. Like you could have like all the truth on your side, and it doesn't really seem to matter when we're talking about. And the other thing too about Israel is that both sides are just, when I say both sides, Democrats and Republicans are so incredibly protective of their relationship with Israel, although the left seems to walk a very fine line in a lot of ways. But at the end of the day, like the corporate left, they don't really care. They don't really care about, how the progressive underlings and the agents that are anti-Zionist or whatever. They don't really care how they feel. They don't. They care less. All they care about is their corporate partnerships and being able to expand their military theater in front if they need to. And this has been going on since really in full effect since 9/11, 2001. So maybe perhaps the eclipse will illuminate the fact that these agreements mean nothing, right? So it's like there's no diplomacy, has nothing to do with it's like there's no hostage thing anymore. Like when you go into Lebanon and you have exploding pagers, it's no longer about hostages, right? That whole hostage thing seems so 2023 right now. And who knows? Look, I think I know what it's about, right? I know what it's about. It's about Erzat's Greater Israel. They want Lebanon gone, right? They want them gone. They want Lebanon gone. They want Gaza gone. And if Egypt's not paying attention, Egypt's on the list. Trust me, they're on the list. Because if nobody stops Israel in that area, they will take as much land and life as humanly possible. Humanly possible. Apparently, they're starting sorties into Yemen and Syria now. And how can they do all this? Well, they're getting help from the United States. They're getting logistical and military help from the US. So maybe this eclipse illuminates what's going on behind the scenes, and who the fuck knows? I'm trying to look at it from a dispassionate perspective, because quite frankly, I'm pretty over this. And I'm over Ukraine, like most of you are. And what do they use these wars for? They use them for resets. And so as this grows, remember, this was, we just want to defend ourselves. That's all we wanted. We just want to defend ourselves. There's these hostages. We have to get these hostages. Oh, yeah, well, it's a greater threat. It's not just Hamas. Hezbollah is a much greater threat. So they just keep expanding. And the reason they're able to expand is because they have been given tacit help from this country, both militarily and logistically. And maybe this eclipse will give us a sense as to what's really going on behind the scenes. I'm more interested in Mars in this chart, and where Mars hits its moon and goes retrograde, and how that affects Israel. And maybe, just maybe, there will be some kind of global judgment. It's like, whoa, wait a minute. You were initially protecting your boundaries, initially protecting, your people, and now all of a sudden you've created this really large regional war. What happened? Because there are all these people who say, well, I stand by Israel's right to defend itself. But they've kept moving the line. There are people who live in Lebanon who have nothing to fucking do with Hezbollah. And even the Lebanese government is not Hezbollah. Do you think Hezbollah makes treaties with other countries? Lebanon has a fucking government. It may not be the best government, but they've got a government. And they have to make treaties with other countries. They're a port, or at least they were a port until somebody blew their port up last year. Gee, I wonder who that could be. Right, so there are people there that have nothing to do with Hezbollah. And yet, it is a blanket assumption, a blanket assertion that this is the group that is now threatening. This is where we got the whole kind of preemptive strike, right? The preemptive strike tactic modality that came through, like, the Patriot Act, the Clear Break, PNAC, Project for a New American Century. This is where it all came from. All right, let's talk California. Moving right along, aren't we? Moving right along. So a lot of you had asked me, hey, can you look at California and the earthquake action? And you know what I came away with when I looked at California's chart? I came away with the fact that there's a reason why I love California. Or at least, of all the places that I lived, don't get me wrong, Texas is nice, in its own way. But you see that sun right there? You see that sun at 16 degrees? That sun is conjunct my midheaven. So California's sun is conjunct my midheaven. And I would say that, how do I explain this? I would say that my life here in Texas has been more stable and my output has been very stable. But the potential for me as an individual, I think, is actually greater in some ways in California. Also, because Mercury is, California's Mercury is conjunct my Mercury moon. I have a lot of interesting things about it. And I never really noticed that until I started to look at this chart. Oh, look at Jupiter. California's Jupiter is at 29 degrees. Gee, that's right on my sun. Oh, look, California was, this was chartered, and of all places, San Jose. September 9th, 1850, they sat down in San Jose. They hammered out this agreement with the United States. Where did I grow up? I grew up in San Jose, California. 4th grade to high school, few stops elsewhere, right? I'm like, wow, this is fucking interesting. Maybe I should move back there. Just kidding. So we have California's chart. And a lot of you are asking me, well, can you talk about the potential of an earthquake in California's chart? Well, all right, we'll do our best. So what do we know that are the planets theoretically that can be the movers and shakers? Uranus, especially in Taurus. So here's Uranus just on the outskirts of Algol. It will go retrograde, right? But when I look at this chart to me doesn't really scream earthquake. Like what is Uranus doing? Not a lot. Like, where's the square? Well, 23, 24, 25 degrees. It's not squaring the true node, right? It's not squaring the ascendant of California. Like, Uranus isn't really doing anything in this chart. So I would be remiss if I looked at this chart and told you that this is an earthquake chart. Honestly, I would say, based on the outer transits, the answer to that would be no. Now, the eclipse, on the other hand, is taking place in California's 12th house. Now we're starting to have some, or again, I'm just talking about outer planets, Uranus. Now we're starting to have some interesting conversation because that Mars is at 11 degrees, right, in the 12th house. And that is where the eclipse is taking place for California, right here, like right there. Boom. Now, there are some oppositions, but they're not really exact oppositions. Saturn, Pluto, Uranus, right, all in the 6th house, which is kind of interesting because to me, this feels seismic. This feels kind of volcanic, right? Like you start to play around with Saturn and Saturn representing Capricorn and the Earth and fire and Pluto, right? And this is this really interesting time, really, really interesting time, 1849, 1850, where these two outer planets are together. And then what happens is eventually they move into Taurus almost simultaneously. And then what happens after that is we start to have these world's fairs. And then we start to have a lot of these earthquakes and fires and all the shit that covers all of that up. And I've often felt that like Tartaria and Tartarus and Taurus are all very much connected. So this is sort of that period of time, 1849, 1850. And there's this transition and movement from this other time to this new time. And to me, in some ways, this does feel very just earthquakey in general, right? Like these three planets. So this eclipse will happen over here on Mars is not necessarily exact, but I think it would be interesting to pay attention to what is going on with California during the time of the eclipse. I think that if it was like more in exactitude, let's say the eclipse was happening, roughly 19 degrees. Now we know that last year in October, that eclipse was around 23, 24. So it was somewhere in between Saturn and Pluto. I am not an expert in the historical relationship between the degrees of eclipses and earthquakes, but I would assume some degree of exactitude would play a significant role, like within about a 3-degree orb and perhaps less. So I would say keep an eye again on this eclipse period on Wednesday, because it's going to be happening in Mars, in California's natal chart, and there is this oppositional action going on here. Now, the chart to me that was in some ways more interesting than California's natal chart is California's progress chart. And there's a couple things about it that to me make it interesting. In this chart, you have Leo on the midheaven. And what do we think of with California, with Leo on the midheaven, or just Leo in general? Leo represents stars, doesn't it? Like it represents stars. It represents movie stars, athletes, and all the great movie stars and all the great athletes. Not all of them, but the majority of them, either lived, played, or originated in California. For instance, Tom Brady may have played in New England and Tampa, but he was born in California. He was born in San Mateo, California. I mean, you got Hollywood. We'll just throw Hollywood out there as a batch, right? So California's got this true node in Leo, and it's like larger than life, big personalities. It's a place that's meant for stars, for people to take the world stage in a lot of ways. But when you look at the progress chart, it's quite different. And in fact, the progress chart is inversed. So now California, instead of having Leo on the midheaven, they have Aquarius on the midheaven. Oh, isn't that interesting? Yeah. And now all of a sudden, that true node, which is in Leo, is down in the fourth house. Pluto transiting California's progressed midheaven, I think is pretty interesting. Right? Because number one, it is going to transform California. Period. End of story. Right? Pluto is going to go through California's 10th house, and Aquarius seems to be a lot more communal, right? Like Leo is more about the individual, the expression, the expression of the ego. Look at me, I'm a star, right? This is very different. Like the star system of California has been gutted. To me, this Pluto conjunction on the midheaven and Pluto moving into California's 10th house, conjunct the South Node, feels a lot more, put the word calm in there, right? Like, well, communal, communitarian, communistic, right? Because these are the words that we deal with Aquarius. Now, what's also interesting is this Mars transit. We've talked about the Mars transit, right? It's going to go into Leo at 6 degrees. It's going to retrograde. It's going to go back into Cancer. Next year, when Pluto is clearly on California's progressed midheaven for good, and Mars returns to the sign of Leo, that is something to pay attention to. This Mars-Pluto opposition. Like, I think that's significant. So, yeah, like put a pin on the upcoming eclipse, see what happens, right? You've got the eclipse coming in, conjuncting Mars, 12th house. There's that oppositional axis to Saturn in the 6th house. It's not quite exact, but there seems to be some energy there. There's a lot of energy here. Once Pluto comes in, and then that Mars transit, let me open up the ephemeris. Let me see here. Here it is. So that Mars transit, when it goes direct again, and the first time that it hits around 02 Leo, is this Mars retrograde. So it's going to hit Leo. It won't be, let's see. Okay. Let me just do this. I have to, because what we're really looking for is the coordination of Pluto and Mars, both in 0 degrees. All right. Okay. So the closest we get is November, where Mars is at 0 Leo and Pluto is at 29 Capricorn. So they're still not, I mean, they're opposite, but they're not opposite in the same sign. So when Pluto goes direct, and that's in November, and that's on the 20th, November 20th, it's at 0, and then Mars is at 4. Okay. Let me go into 2025, because that's, I really want to see if that Mars-Pluto opposition gets exact in 2025. Let's just see here. Okay. So Pluto, Mars goes back into Leo in April of 2025, and the exact opposition, which will not be taking place at 0 Aquarius, but Pluto at 3 Aquarius and Mars at 3 Leo, will be the 26th of April in 2025. So if you're looking at the progress chart, that means that transiting Pluto will be right there, right? And transiting Mars will be right there. So somewhere between 0 Leo and 5. Now, this chart will change because this is a progress chart. So it won't be 0 Leo by this time. It'll probably be like maybe 1 Leo, but it'll still be in there. Like that is the exactitude of that Mars transit. To me, this is violent, right? That Pluto-Mars opposition in fixed signs in the progress chart is violent. And violent in the sense that it could be landmass violent or just violent in general. So if we're having earthquake talk for California and we're looking at the progress chart, I think that Mars-Pluto opposition. But it has to be, again, I'm splitting hairs. I think Pluto needs to be in a fixed sign, right? Because when you're in that fixity, that's when that dynamic tension takes place. The other thing about this chart, just for California, that I find interesting is that it's almost the exact opposite of its natal chart. We know that California is 16 Virgo in the natal chart. Here, it's at 11 Pisces. So 5 years from now, California's natal chart will be the exact, California's progress chart will be the exact opposite of its natal chart. That's kind of interesting. And you can just tell, like, Virgo is a very hardworking sign. And even though California plays a lot, there's a lot of really hardworking people in California. Like I grew up there, and I mean, maybe just America was generally hardworking at that time, and California was a subsection of it. But this is very indicative of a very different state, right? And when you look at California's progressed moon, this is balsamic, right? This is a balsamic progressed moon for the state of California. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens. 2 months from 2 months from now. Here, let me see if I'm going to figure this out. Hold on. I think this was, let me see. Where's California? Right here. Let me get into the progressed moon part. Give me 1 second. Let's see if we can just nail this. All right, let's go out to a month from now. All right, let's show this. Getting closer. Here, let me show you this. So this is California's progressed moon on December 30th. And it is right here, right, conjunct California's progressed sun. So if we were to move forward into the first 2 weeks of 2025, that moon would cross over California's progressed sun. And what's interesting is that there's really nothing else going on here with these two planets. We have these minor aspects, the conjunction with Neptune. It's very watery, isn't it? Like there's a lot of water here. A lot of water. And I just wonder, like, what the effects of this progressed moon moving over this progressed sun, and particularly, what is it, it's at the Cancerian decan. I just wonder, like, where the water levels are going to be in this state at that particular, like, again, if I were to throw a dart at this thing in the progressed chart of California, maybe as a result of Earth changes, I'd be much more concerned about water, and not the lack of water, but the overabundance of water. Flooding, like huge flooding. And maybe that's precipitated by, where are we? December? Yeah, we'll be in that Mars-Pluto opposition, but it won't be, well, see, the midheaven has changed a little bit, hasn't it? Interesting. All right, so that makes, let's see, let's do this. Throw some transits in there. So there we go. There's Pluto, right? 1, and then transiting Mars is at 2. So there we go. There we go. So if I was looking at California in the progressed chart, and not just the potential of an earthquake, but also an overabundance of water, and particularly the moon sort of overcoming the sun here as we go from balsamic, crossing over, this would be a date I'd look at right here, based on the progressed chart of California. And we still have all those Aries planets, right? But instead of the 6th house now, they're in the 12th house. And Uranus has joined the party, right? Or it was always a part of the party. So there you go. You wanted me to look at California's chart. I feel like the telltale signs, if you're going to get into earthquake territory, are around here. Also, to me, from a socio-political perspective, this all seems very, it's easy to just talk about Aquarius as being socialist, right? It's really easy to talk about Aquarius in that regard, because that's kind of like how it's wired. It's not about Leo and top down and kings. It's revolutionary. Aquarius is revolutionary. But in the same token, when you put the sun in the 11th house, which is also Aquarius's house, and you put Neptune there, and you put the moon there, representing California, it all seems very flimsy in a lot of ways. Like the values are really, there's like none. When I look at this progressed chart, there's like nothing really holding this state together. Like, where's the Earth? You have progressed Venus in Capricorn, Taurus ascendant, thank God, but that's about it. And it almost feels like sort of suspended and disembodied in some ways. Like, it's very weird. Like, this is a very weird chart. Like if this was a person, this would be a very unusual chart to interpret for that person. It would almost be like, and we know that California exists. I mean, come on, it's a big thing. But it would almost be like the person doesn't really exist. To me, this feels very ghost-like, right? Like sort of skimming across the surface of relationships and friendships. Like the person's there but not there. That's what this progressed chart. And so I guess if I could encapsulate it, like I have a memory of what California was in my mind. And I think there are people that live in California that still have that memory, but that place is gone. It's like and even though there are people there, and there's some good people in California. Don't get me wrong. There are good people there, but it almost feels in some ways like a ghost ship. When I see this is like ethereal and ghostly in a lot of ways. It's just a vibe, right? It's a vibe that I'm picking up on this, and it's all, when you look at California from that natal chart, it's Leo, it's Virgo, it's Libra, right? It's in that formation or that part of the chart where it's like flexing its identity. It's like figuring out how to deal with all these resources, of which there's an abundance of in the state. And then there's this connection with Libra and beauty and beautiful people and all these things. Like this version of California is so far away from that. And it's, it's like it's dancing with like social justice shit up in the 10th house. And then like, what are the real relationships there? And I'm not talking about people who, because I know that trust me, there are people that I know and I'm friends with and they have friends. So it's not like friendships don't exist in California. But like, who are California's partners? Who are they really like doing business with? Or what is the state really? It's very interesting. Very interesting. Anyway, so you asked, and there you go, based on the progress chart, if I had to, make an astrological dart throw, this period would be something this period in December I would take a long, hard look at. And it's because of this Mars-Pluto opposition right here, and then this progressed moon getting super close to the sun, progressed sun, and eventually overcoming the sun. That's a lot of water and not a lot of land in this chart. Just saying. Now, it could be an overabundance of spiritual people. Maybe it's the Great White Brotherhood, right? 11th house descending upon California to save it from its elemental fate. I guess we'll find out. All right. Let's round this sucker off and let's talk a little Kamala Harris. But before we do that, of course, I have to talk about True Hemp Science, who is the sponsor of this show. Chris is going to be at our event, hopefully, on Saturday, and he'll bring out his CBD and give us a few CBD samples and some of the goodies that our community has partaken in ever since I started to really work hand in glove with Chris, and him being the only business I work with is True Hemp Science. I don't want to have a lot of sponsors cluttering up my stream. I'm my own sponsor in a lot of ways because I make a living out of doing this. And you can always get a reading from me, join locals. I just celebrated my 64th birthday. I gave away 64 astrological courses to people who joined locals during that time. In fact, I gave away a few more. And you old timers who've been following me, like really following me, if you DM me, I will give you a course. All right. So I'm gonna let your conscience be the guide on that, because I don't want to leave some of the old timers out like, well, I've been following Robert for 10 years now. He doesn't give me a goddamn course. I'll give some of those away. I'm not going to give away the store. I'll you know, I'm loyal. I'm loyal to the people that have been loyal to me. So I'll get you some. But getting back to True Hemp Science, just go to truehempscience.com. Check out their products. It's great stuff. Joan's cat will take the CBD right off the dropper. Will eat the pet sounds right off the dropper. I've seen it. Should do a video of it. Anyway, type in 15MINS and you'll get a free goodie bag with your order of $100 or more. And if you spend $150 or more, you get free shipping. And there's always a 30-day money-back guarantee. TrueHempScience.com. All right. Let's bring this baby. Let's bring this baby into port, and let's talk a little Kamala Harris before we get out of here. Look at me. An efficient 2-hour show. Getting to the heart of the matter. And hopefully giving you something to think about. All right. I've been wanting to look at this chart for a while. And is there a point in time when things get dicey for Kamala Harris? Yes. What is that point in time? Well, we got to pay attention to Mars. Right there. So we have Mars in Cancer at 25 degrees. Now, what day is this? This is October 23rd, when we're talking about 2 days into Scorpio. No, 0 Scorpio on the 23rd. Okay. So why is this day important? Well, it's the beginning of an exact T-square between Harris's moon, Harris's sun, right? 27 Libra, 27 Aries. That's her moon. Born in the full moon in Aries, right? This Mars is going to come in, square that moon, square that sun. Now, if you've been following Candace Owens, she has been going through Kamala Harris's genealogy. And it all started when Janet Jackson said Kamala Harris is not black. And then people went after Janet Jackson. So Candace Owens has been spending, she's got a pretty good research team, plus she has a bunch of her people who watch her show, just combing through every single record. And it's looking more and more like there is a major disjunction between her father, her father's mother, her grandmother. Like, you have to go through all these different episodes of Candace Owens, and they're actually worth going through. But it's really amazing how they have found 2 different versions. I think his name is Jonathan Harris. There are 2 different versions of Jonathan Harris, and they're born 2 years apart, and one died. And there's this woman who shows up, and it appears that she is the real grandmother of Kamala Harris on the father's side, and she's white. And I'm not saying this so that, we're trying to provoke any kind of racial tension, but there's something off, right? There's something completely off about this. Here, let me show you the chart. Let me get back in here. Where are we? Hold on. Let's see. All right. Give me 1 second. We're going to get there. There we go. All right. My bad. So let me go over here. Let me do the share. If I'd known this, I would have run the banner. All right. Where is it? There it is right there. All right. Thanks, Tom, for the heads up. This is what I'm talking about. There's Mars right there. Right? There's her sun. There's her moon. The sun is the father. The moon is the mother. The son becomes the father when the child basically turns 7. Before the child's 7, the father is the son. So here's Mars in Cancer. The date is October 23rd, so it's the lead up. This is just before the election. It is just mere weeks before the election. Now, of course, Mars will get into a wider square. Once it gets to 20 degrees, it's kind of in that 7-degree orbit, and there's tension. But we're looking at exactitude here. We're on the march to exactitude. And the second house is like roots, right? And Cancer is the family. And then the 8th house, what is the 8th house? The 8th house is your ancestors. It's the genetic pool of your ancestors. So this period for Harris is fraught with tension. Lots of tension. My read on Harris right now, this is just my energetic read, is she's over her head. She's over her head. And I don't live under a rock. I pay attention to public appearances, interviews. There has not been a lot of public Harris lately. Not a lot. And I think there's a reason for that. They number one, I think they're keeping her under wraps as much as they can. And number two, this is just my sense, I think she's way in over her head. The metaphor I like to use is, let's say you're swimming in a lake, right? Like a big country lake. And you're in the middle of the lake and it's getting dark. That's what it feels like for her. The machine, that's a completely different thing. We're not talking about the machine. We're talking about the individual. And it feels like she's way in over her head. This is the thing about Trump that kind of blows me away, if that's the real Trump. But like the heat that individual has had to take for, 6 years now? Going on 8 years, really? It's a lot of fucking heat. I don't know if Harris can handle the heat. Even though she's got Mars and Leo and Moon and Aries, yeah, that's kind of hot, right? Passionate. I don't know if she can handle the heat though. Not in the scrutiny, not in the way of scrutiny. So I think that this genealogical thing could make some serious waves. And even if it makes moderate waves, it's enough to upset her. So I feel like as the election gets closer and the clock is ticking and we get to this October 23rd date, that she is a time bomb and waiting to go off. Angry. That's angry energy. Like Mars Moon squares are angry. Mars Sun squares are angry. Right? And in Cancer, it can be incredibly defensive. She's not going to have her Mars return until next year, There will be a Mars-Pluto opposition going on in her chart, just like everybody's chart, right? She has Pluto in her 8th house, which is what? It's ancestral. So I think this thing that Candace Owens is cooking up is something. And it's so funny that there was this whole thing with Obama and his birth certificate, and it feels like we're kind of going through this again. And Harris feels very much like a very Obama-esque candidate. So keep your eye on this date right here, right around this time. We can back it off and go, 19th of October, roughly, 18th of October. Watch the tension mount in her chart. It's not going to be pretty at all. Not at all. And you may hear rumors about her being explosive or agitated, or it just might come out. I think her candidacy is fragile. No matter how much money she has, no matter how many people, white guys for Kamala or whatever, I think her candidacy is very fragile. And it's fragile in ways that Biden in 2020 was not. You just had to trot him out there and, give him as much of his cocktail as he could and come up with a double or whatever. But Harris is different, and she's much more emotional. And I think this is already getting to her. And that's what I mean by a fragile candidate. So keep your eyes on that. I think she's going to implode. But the question becomes, because this is really close to the election, provided we have it and we're not in some continuity of government bullshit situation brought on by whatever happens with the port and potential strike. If we go through, this is just mere weeks before the election. And this is her most kind of explosive and implosive transit during that time. Lose your shit. But again, it's not about her. It's about the machine behind her. So if they can keep her in a semblance of, I don't know, holding her molecules together, it might work. But this is pretty dramatic. This is lashing out, explosive, losing shit kind of dramatic. And it's already building. This tension is already building. Okay. We've got the Waltz JD Vance debate. That's actually going to be interesting. That's going to be worth watching. Trump Harris was only worth watching because they're so different. How is Trump going to deal with this? Waltz and Vance are going to be very, very interesting. JD Vance can hold his own with Tim Waltz. I think Tim Waltz did something today where he was at the Detroit Lions game or the Vikings. I forget which game he was at. He was at a football game. And he was walking off the field, and there were people in the stands that were saying, "Go Trump, and Trump, Trump, Trump." And Tim Waltz raised his hand and flipped them off. You can't really do that. As much as we've degraded these positions of president and vice president, and they've been truly degraded, you still can't do that. You can't do it. Now, somebody will say, "Oh, gee, look at him. He's had enough of those Trumpers. Good for him." No, you know who would do that? A teenager would do that. That's what a teenager would do. Somebody who's theoretically second in command, wouldn't do that. If they said Trump, why didn't you just blow him his fucking, Rip Taylor kisses, right? Like, love you too, right? Like, that would have been a much better move. No, what does he do? He flips him off. Is that a guy you really want? He's another guy that's wound tight, and he's got all that Aries in his chart. He's got Mars right now squaring up. I think JD Vance is going to get this guy to lose his shit in this debate. JD Vance is a cool character. Tim Walz. I don't think JD Vance has had some adversity. Like, he grew up, not the best situation. Somewhere along the way, somebody tapped him on the shoulder and says, okay, you got a path and we're going to help you. And I think Tim Walz has had some of that too. And what's weird is they both have these military records. Like, JD Vance was overseas, and Tim Walz will bring this up. So what did you do overseas? Take pictures? What was your role? Right? Well, at least Vance can say, well, at least I was there. And I didn't abandon So this is going to be a very interesting debate. I predict JD Vance will get Tim Walz to blow his fuse. And JD Vance will wind up looking better. Whether he's a better debater or not remains to be seen. They'll look at each other's record, right? JD Vance has a lot on Tim Walz for George Floyd and a bunch of other stuff. It'll be must-see TV, actually. All right, so here we go. I started at 7:30, 7:20, and now it's 9:44. And look how much ground we've covered tonight. Do you like the new efficient Virgo model of me? I've made the most of our time tonight, and I hope you've enjoyed it. And I hope it's not all been doom or gloom, but we are in some pretty heavy water. And in terms of heavy water, for you people in the Southeast, well, I hope you got out of it as soon as you possibly can. And I hope you're able to retain your possessions and whatever is important to you, and don't let them put you on the reservation. I mean, because that's what these are, aren't they? These megalopolises and these 15-minute cities, they're just 21st century reservations. That's what they are. Don't let them put you there. All right. I'm out of here. Thank you all for being here, being a part of the show. Thank you for your support, as always. Mods, thank you for your participation, monitoring the chat room. For everyone that's purchased a cup of coffee for me tonight or any previous shows, thank you so much for doing that, especially my birthday. Those were some very kind gifts that came from you. And what am I leaving out? I'll have the day pass for the virtual day pass for the event. Hopefully by tomorrow. I just have to link a bunch of stuff up. And that just about does it. Treat each other well. God bless. Use your head in order to discern what's real, your heart to set what's possible. I'm Robert Phoenix. Take good care. We'll see you on Tuesday, and bye for now.